Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. Last video, I talked about a victory for client rights and therapy equality for people looking for help with unwanted same-sex attraction and gender nonconformity issues. And today, I'm recording this on December 1st. Today, there's some other good news, another victory. In this one, regarding a victory for gender sanity, basically. Now, this isn't a victory necessarily for the United States, at least not yet, but hopefully this will usher in a trend of people starting to use some common sense and fighting for what's right, what's really right for children. And I'm talking about when it comes to gender transitioning or gender affirmation surgeries or procedures to help children and adolescents transition from one gender or sex to another, such as by using puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones and at some point surgery, putting them on that path toward transition and mutilating their body, removing healthy body parts, treating puberty like it's a disease. All this insanity that we're seeing as part of the transgender ideology, we're finally starting to see the fruits of it. For those of us who've been noticing this insanity over the last several years, we've been saying just wait until all the lawsuits come in. When all these now adults who as children were transitioned to their doctors, just sort of some ways coerced them or didn't question them well enough, didn't challenge their ideas about their identities, but just enabled them and encouraged them to keep pursuing some sort of transition or change in cosmetically and oftentimes doing irreparable damage to their bodies. There's going to be a significant number of these individuals who grow up and will regret their choices that they made when they were teenagers or pre-adolescents, and then they will sue. They'll sue maybe their parents, they'll sue the doctors, the health system, the insurance companies, the state that allows this stuff to even happen, because a child should not have that sort of power to consent to do something as life-altering as preventing themselves from going through the natural process of puberty, or to remove healthy organs and body parts in order to conform to their image of the opposite sex or the gender that they identify with. A child can't really consent to do that. They don't understand the repercussions. They don't have a long-term perspective. There's my wife and I were just talking about this. It's like, don't we know this just from movies? Where like the teenager falls in love with some kid and the kid breaks their heart and the adult has to come along and be like, hey, I know it seems like it's for eternity and this is the worst thing ever in your life, but you'll get through this. Like, we use that mentality when it comes to some things in childhood and teenage years, but when it comes to this issue, we think that nope, if they start thinking they're the opposite sex, it's going to be that way forever. They're always going to think that way about themselves, so we better help them now to make their bodies conform to their mentality. It's like we literally check our brains at the door. We reject all conventional wisdom and common sense when it comes to this issue. And we are playing a dangerous experimental game with our children. So we're going to see the consequences of this as these lawsuits come in, as these people who transition, who a lot of times they have other mental illnesses, they have maybe major depression, they have major anxiety issues, they may that are influencing their viewpoint. There's growing evidence of a trend among people on the autism spectrum. So we've been saying, just wait for the lawsuits. Unfortunately, we got to wait for lawsuits to come in to wake people up to the insanity of this transgender movement. Well, fortunately, we have one of our lawsuits, and here's what played out. So, Keira Bell, she's 23 in Manchester, England. She was diagnosed with gender dysphoria as a child, and she wanted to become a boy. And so she went to a clinic, the only clinic in the UK, the Tavistock Clinic, which is part of the NHS, the National Health Service. And she was put on puberty blockers at age 16. Now, I read that and I was like, really? She probably already went through puberty, but she still was developing, so it impaired her development to some degree, I expect. And and then at the age of 17, they put her on cross-sex hormones like testosterone, which then left her with a deep voice and might have also made her infertile. And then at age 20, she had a double mastectomy, only later realizing that she had gone down the wrong path and she regretted everything she did. So now she is 23. She's identifying as a woman. She's properly identifying with her actual sex. And she's looking at all the damage she did to herself under the guidance and I would say manipulation of the Tavistock Clinic, and she's suing them. So let me just read some from the Daily Mail, an article that was released Monday regarding the court case. She said, "I should have been challenged on the proposals or the claims that I was making for myself. And I think that would have made a big difference as well if I was just challenged on the things I was saying." What is the message we're hearing? Believe all children. Trust them. A child knows best. They know who they really are. The whole dogma right now is to never question or challenge a child who claims they're the opposite sex, that claims they're maybe even some other gender. They're agender, or they're gender atypical, or gender fluid, or what. We're not taught to have them use critical thinking about these things, but just to affirm them, to validate every idea that they have about themselves, no matter how they might have arrived at it. In fact, there's no investigation to how they came to arrive at that. At least not a very deep one. This is how crazy this whole thing has gotten. It's such a big business, this gender transitioning. According to legal documents seen by the Sunday Times, the Tavistock Clinic has referred hundreds of patients under 16, and some as young as 11, for puberty-blocking drugs since 2014. The last decade has also seen a significant rise in the number of children being referred for gender treatment in England. In 2009, 40 girls under 18 were referred to the Tavistock, but by 2017, this figure had soared to 1,806. Professor Michael Biggs, a professor of sociology at Oxford, said, "If Kiera won, this would have an effect all around the English-speaking world. It would be a very significant ruling." And yes, it is. In addition to Keira Bell, another claimant on the lawsuit is an anonymous mom, just called Mum A. She's the mother of a 15-year-old girl who is on the autistic spectrum. She has Asperger's syndrome, which now is just autism since DSM-5. I'm not sure what it would be in England if they use the same new terminology that we do in the U.S. So her daughter is dealing with some gender dysphoria, and she's worried if she goes to that clinic, they're going to fast-track her and put her on puberty blockers and start her on cross-sex hormones as well. The mother says they will simply affirm the girl's beliefs, mistaken in her mother's opinion, that she is really a boy. In reality, the mom believes her daughter's desire to be male is driven by her autism. The reason why we're seeing this trend, most likely, is because people on the spectrum will tend to fixate on an idea. And with people on the spectrum, once they get something, they're latching onto it, they can become very obsessive over that thought, that idea, and won't really want to let it go very easily. So that could be why those on the spectrum are more impressionable. And we're seeing this contagion of cases of early onset gender dysphoria. And I think it's a lot among girls. And it can't just be because, oh no, we've always had these numbers of children with transgenderism. They just always have been silent because of internalized transphobia. No, that cannot be the explanation. There's a social contagion going on because of the rise in affirmation that is coming with this whole transgender movement. There's something that feels special about it and affirming. So I think there's something to that, especially when you get some kids who will fixate on some ideas. And there's something fantastical about the idea. They haven't quite matured into more realistic thinking. So anyway, Mum A, the other one in the lawsuit, says, "This is bigger than just my child. The whole narrative is that if your child is confused about their gender, then transition is the only course of action," she told the Daily Mail on Sunday last month. "There doesn't seem to be any discussion of other possibilities, and that's quite frightening. The consequences of them getting it wrong are catastrophic," and they are. There's a lie that is often put out there that, oh, well, you can go on puberty blockers, and if they change your mind, you can take them off, no harm, no foul. When in reality, when you use puberty blockers, you're doing damage to someone's natural development, and a lot of times those damages are irreversible. It might cause infertility. There's a host of other complications. So, and oftentimes they don't stop there. They put them on the cross-sex hormones not long afterwards. For Keira Bell, she described that the most they did as far as an assessment were 3 one-hour appointments. They did not do a full psychiatric assessment. There used to be standards that before you start any sort of chemical transition, at least in the U.S., the standard used to be, before any chemical transition of any type, that you spend a year living as the opposite sex. It was a year or 2 years. So it was a period of time where you showed that you were comfortable identifying and sort of presenting as the opposite sex. You know, you really can't fully do that. And then they would consider then moving on, as long as the ideas have persisted and you're in therapy too the whole time. It's not just treated medically or cosmetically, but you're seeing a total abandonment of these traditional procedures, which even I disagreed with those. But we're getting more and more radical with how we're proceeding with this issue. So anyway, Keira Bell's case went before 3 judges at a divisional court. And the article I'm reading here was from Monday, so it was before they made the decision. The decision was expected today, and we got the decision today. Here's an article from the Christian Post by a friend of mine, Brandon Showalter. The UK High Court on Tuesday ruled against the Tavistock Clinic, the NHS's sole gender clinic, in favor of the detransitioner and the other anonymous claimant. The High Court ruled that in cases involving teenagers younger than 18, doctors might need to consult the courts for authorization and provide additional guidelines as to how young people suffering from gender dysphoria are to be treated. The ruling also noted that the court asked Tavistock for statistics regarding the number of youth referred to GIDS for puberty-blocking drugs who had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. However, the clinic did not provide the court with that data from its patient records. The High Court also noted that this lack of data analysis and apparent lack of record-keeping of children with autism was surprising. Thus, the judges could not determine the proportion of young people who were considered capable of giving consent under the Gillick standard, the test by which capability of giving consent to medical interventions is measured in the UK. What is known as Gillick competency in the UK centers around a 1985 case that was decided in House of Lords in Gillick versus West Norfolk and Wisbech Area Health Authority, in which lawmakers debated whether a child younger than 16 could be prescribed contraception by and with the discretion of a physician without parental consent. So they use that case to determine if a minor can give consent regarding medical procedures. Now, it's not a complete victory to me. This is a good first step. The courts decided that in order for a minor to be prescribed puberty blockers or to begin the transitioning process, that they would need to get court approval. So that still leaves the door wide open. Not wide open, but still leaves the door open for some children to get the approval, depending on the judge, I guess. It's not as decisive a victory as I would prefer. And of course, the Tavistock Clinic does plan to appeal the decision. So this may be disputed. This may get overturned. Hopefully not. But this is a really good first step. Of course, transgender activist groups like Mermaids are calling this like the worst thing ever. And it's just insane. They're calling the ruling devastating for trans young people in the country and maybe even throughout the world. Not the Bee had their take on the whole ruling. Their headline read, UK court rules that children as young as 13 can take puberty blockers to transition. Because, yes, ultimately the court is saying that they can if they get a court approval, if they get a judge to sign off on it. So there's going to be a little more of a hurdle, but I think they might not be seeing this as much as the victory that it really is in some ways. So here's what the court said. The court ruled that in order for a child to be competent to give valid consent, the child would have to understand, retain, and weigh a number of factors, including the immediate consequences of the treatment in physical and psychological terms. The child would also need to understand that the vast majority of patients taking puberty-blocking drugs proceed to taking cross-sex hormones and are therefore a pathway to much greater medical interventions. The judges said in their ruling it is highly unlikely that a child aged 13 or under would be competent to give consent to the administration of puberty blockers. It is doubtful that a child aged 14 or 15 could understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blockers. In respect of young persons aged 16 and over, the legal position is that there is a presumption that they have the ability to consent to medical treatment. So 16 is the age of consent in the UK, not 18 like one of the other articles I read said. The court continues, given the long-term consequences of the clinical interventions at issue in this case, and given that the treatment is as yet innovative and experimental, we recognize that clinicians may well regard these as cases where the authorization of the court should be sought prior to commencing the clinical treatment. So like I said, not as decisive a victory as like. They should have just outright banned any sort of puberty blockers for children. Even 16, why are you, at that point, they're already experienced most of puberty, so why interrupt it at that point? So they really should not be interfering with a natural, healthy process of development, lifespan development. In response to the ruling, Keira Bell said, "The judgment is not political, it's about protecting vulnerable children. I'm delighted to see that common sense has prevailed. And it's sad that we even had to have a court case in order to even allow common sense to prevail. This just shows how upside down we are right now in our society." So back to Keira Bell. This is not just a political issue, like she says. There are real people being impacted by these decisions. They're decisions made by professionals, by medical professionals who are supposed to be looking out for their best interests. And maybe they think they are. Maybe they do have ulterior motives. Maybe they have an agenda. Maybe they just start raking in the dough from all of these operations and making the person basically, if you sign up for transition, you are becoming a medical patient for life. You will be dependent on those cross-sex hormones for the rest of your life. Your body's not going to absorb them, and the changes will stay consistent after just a few months or years of taking them. You need to continually take them to maintain those changes because your body is not meant to do that. So yeah, they're going to become dependent on the medical system. So maybe some doctors are taking advantage of that. That's a possibility. And maybe some of them genuinely believe that this is the best way to treat the gender dysphoria and prevent them from getting depressed and suicidal, even though the evidence shows that's not actually the helpful way to go. Especially when you realize that, like 80, 90% of children and adolescents with gender dysphoria end up desisting and coming to identify with their actual biological sex by the time they reach adulthood. So we're preventing that from happening. We're interfering with that natural process, and that's all without therapy. So I love what Keira Bell says. This is even prior to the ruling. She added, um, she's talking about all the damage that this has done to her. She said, "This is going to affect me for the rest of my life, and I have to make do with that and try and accept how I am now and attempt to move on with that." She added, "There needs to be explorative therapy." I don't think that changing your body is going to help a psychological condition. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think it's important for these children to be protected and to be actually listened to in a professional manner. And that's what we're trying to do in therapy for these issues. We're not forcing anything on anyone, we're helping them to actually think critically about something that is so important. The consequences of what they end up deciding will affect them the rest of their lives. And not just them, but the future generation as well. She may be infertile. She will no longer be able to produce children, most likely. So, any potential children she could have had are now precluded, prevented from happening, unless a miracle happens. So, this is a case for so many of the detransitioners who come to regret the decisions they made when they were in a vulnerable state. And we need to provide them a place of safety where they can really think through this stuff rationally and not just affirm their feelings and the thoughts that they may be having, but to help them explore this stuff, give them space and time to really think about it in a critical manner. We need to keep our heads, think wisely and soundly about this stuff. So I do consider this a bit of a victory. I hope you will as well. All right. Once again, hit that like button, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And if you want to keep track of me in case I ever go to other platforms, you can join my email list. So just send me an email with your contact info and I'll keep you up to date as I make changes because of censorship if that ever happens. All right. Thank you so much. God bless.